Hey, everybody, it's Susan Lindner. I am your host of the Innovation Storyteller Show. And today's going to be a really interesting day. I hope you're buckled up for a conversation about creativity and how we inject creativity into the innovation mindset. It's a theme we've been exploring and with our friends at Lego and a couple of other great guests, all talking about how we open up spaces, how we get a little bit broader, or sometimes how we dig even a little bit more deeply into a vein when we are trying to unearth what's new, exciting, what's interesting, maybe facets of the diamond that we haven't yet seen. And that's why I'm really thrilled to have Dave Zaboski with me today. He is a former Disney animator and is currently the co-founder and CCO of Laetro.com, a tech-enabled community of elite creative servicing enterprise clients with the best-in-class creative services. Dave's roles include culture and community creation, art and creative direction, evangelizing, content creation, and he often talks about the creative process for enterprise and small businesses around the nation. And my guess is probably around the world too. Dave, thank you so much for joining me today.
Susan, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
So you and I met through Samudra, which is an organization I knew nothing about previously, but my good friends, Tracy Lovejoy and Shannon Lucas over at Catalyst Constellations, who have been on the show as well, invited me to sit on the bench and watch some of the best creative minds at work in the innovation space. And I was utterly blown away. And you led a workshop for all of us on the 2-day Samudra Summit, really challenging us to think about creativity and storytelling in a way that we hadn't before. So how did you come to this process, Dave? What brought you into the world of innovation, if you think of yourself as an innovator, or are you first and foremost artist, and then that just blends and melts like watercolor into the work you do?
I think that art and innovation, they go together, or creativity and innovation. I mean, it's kind of the same thing. I might even define innovation as creativity on purpose. And so you can have creativity and just sort of swim through your sketchbook, but creativity on purpose is where innovation comes in. And I was an animator at Disney Studios. I'll go back. I've done a universe of drawing in my life. When I graduated from college at UCSB, my big Jewish family in Los Angeles said, "Hey, you're a college graduate. You can do anything you want in your life. What kind of doctor or lawyer is that going to be?" I had really committed to making art. There was something so beautiful in the idea of being a maker. I wanted to be in that fulcrum place where the pencil met the paper. And so I had done a bunch of drawings and paintings for friends for their birthdays because I got a D+ in high school art. That's another story that led me to a place that was filled with art school dropouts and failures and amazing wild horses from around the world. I went to Art Center College of Design, got an internship at Disney Studios, and got hired at Disney Studios at a time when they were hiring 1 or 2 people a year. Wow. And I was in the animation department, filled with the most incredible creatives and artists that the world could accumulate at the time. And I had an opportunity to work on movies like Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Lion King, Pocahontas, Hunchback of Notre Dame, the movies that are considered the second golden age of animation. And one of the things that happened in that environment was that we were committed to a kind of creative development, that we were telling big stories that were bigger than any of the egos involved. And so we needed both real deep training on the principles of animation, squash and stretch and silhouettes and charm and things like that, but also the principles of the animator, like not just how to make things, but like how to make the maker, how to think about your creative process so that it became solidified as a profession. Like I couldn't just say, "Oh, it's Tuesday, I don't feel like creating." Like we had to take this seriously as a system and process to deliver on a project. I remember riding my bike to work once and seeing the bus that was wrapped with Hunchback of Notre Dame, and the scene on it was the scene that was on my desk, and I was thinking, oh crap, I haven't finished that scene yet. So there were systems and practices to get all of these wild horses pointed in the right direction. And we had classes in creative development on that very thing. And before I left Disney, I was the one giving those classes. And then I parlayed that into a kind of consultancy afterwards. And that's led me to look at the process of entrepreneurial innovation in the same way that we approached how to turn a thought into a thing from the world of art.
How to turn a thought into a thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because entrepreneurs do the same thing. They go, hey, I've got this great idea. How do I make this idea real? And so we in the art world, I was saying earlier that the kind of joke that I suppose it's so esoteric, it doesn't kill in either department, but I don't come to the entrepreneurial world through Peter Drucker and that sort of entrepreneurial thing. I come through Mort Drucker, who is a artist at Mad Magazine. We in the art world, we turn thoughts into things in a different way than the entrepreneurs do in a kind of capitalist space. There's a couple of elements that happen in the art track that turns a thought into a thing that I think are really relevant to the entrepreneurial journey, and especially now. And one is love, and the other one is storytelling. Like we in the art world, we've got to tell a story. I've got to create something that resonates with you, whether it's a portrait or a peach or an innovative idea. It's got to resonate with you. So I've got to find some story in there that works. And stories work because there's a love to them. So I think I was mentioning this just before we started that I once had the senior exec from a large tech company say to me, hey man, why do we need story? We don't need story. We got data. Story is old news. There's no science to story. We don't need it. And I was like, oh man, there's totally science to story, but it's not math. It's chemistry. That's what makes all the difference.
And we know this from actually doing the scientific research on what happens to the brain when you hear a great story, right? I mean, take yourself to any horror movie and watch your adrenaline start going through your body, watch your dopamine response kick in when, the victim gets away for the 12th time. Ask Jamie Lee Curtis what's going through her brain blood barrier.
I mean, there's cortisol that creates some stress and brings your attention up. There's the dopamine that gives you more curiosity, gets you sort of attached to characters. You're playing for their win. There's oxytocin, that's the love hormone that, oh my God, they kissed and now I feel better about the whole thing. And then there's serotonin that comes in afterwards. It's sort of the mortar that solidifies that new experience into something real for you. We find that why story works, especially in innovative environments, is because you can't just tell somebody something and change their mind. You have to drive their experience to a present, and in that present, infuse it with an experience and information and a story that changes their way of looking at how reality is constructed. And then they infuse that new reality into their worldview. So experience, storytelling, that's how you shift a consciousness.
Right. And it's also how we shift from the status quo to the future, because that shift is a really terrifying shift, as many of my audience members know, when we're trying to introduce a new product or service. And we've certainly had guests on the show who have talked about cannibalizing their number one selling product. Folks at Corning Glass who invented the cathode ray tube. The big old tubes that used to be in your television that acted as furniture, not just not just
the
something that
hi-fi
hung on the wall.
Yeah.
And they have a sign in their innovation center that says, "Don't be afraid to eat your own." And they invented the flat panel television, right? The glass that goes there, but they had to kill off their number one, the golden goose, in order to allow the next stream to come in. And so the story is what allows us to overcome the abject terror that a 170-year-old company would say, I'm going to take this risk.
Right. Well,
kill the whole thing, but it's time to burn the boats.
Right. So your story creates the future. There's this idea that we sort of live with, is seeing is believing. But I think it's possible that it's the other way around, that believing is seeing. So there's a philosopher called Stephen West who talks about this story. So imagine, this is a little rough, but imagine you're being chased by a ravenous bear, right? And so this bear is coming after you, and you're running from the bear. You probably can't outrun the bear, and now you find that there's this chasm in front of you. If you can leap over the chasm, you can escape the ravenous bear. Now, if you don't believe that it's possible to leap over that chasm, then you won't try, and it'll end badly for you. Be a good day for the bear, but not so good for you, right? If you do believe, even slightly, that you can jump over this chasm and the successful result happens, it was only possible because belief was present. And so if you think about your constructed world, everything in the room around you is there because someone believed it was possible. The book, the chair, the microphone, somebody believed that it was possible, and that belief was what catalyzed that thought turning into a thing.
Right. And which is why so many people went on to break the 4-minute mile barrier, right? After Roger Bannister did it, just within months after that. And it's one thing after another. It's why every cool gadget comes out of Star Trek, because some wildly imaginative story writer was able to implant the idea in each of us, right?
I mean,
made it
that
possible.
flip phone was the best designed phone that there has ever been. I mean, this thing is designed so that I drop it and I have to get the screen fixed.
They know what they're doing. By the way,
Yeah.
Corning Glass, Gorilla Glass, you'll just be investing in more of it. So,
Right. But that idea that story changes the future, I think, is really incredibly powerful, because here's the thing, Susan. The universe has been around for 14 billion years. Maybe 8 billion years ago, the planet started to form. 2.5 billion years ago, we had life emerge from the primordial ooze and crawl up onto the world. In the 2.5 billion years that the Earth has been teeming with life, there have been 100 million species. Now, there's 10 million species alive right now. That means that 90% of all life that's ever lived on this planet has gone extinct, never to return. Of the 100 million species, there's only one that's figured out the secret to turning an idea into reality. There's only one that tells stories, and that's us. And I think that is our greatest gift, more than like opposable thumbs and a great big brain. I think that our ability to tell stories, to share knowledge with each other in a way that over time accrues to wisdom, and then it builds a culture. I think that our ability to tell stories is the differentiator of our species in 100 million species over 2.5 billion years. And so to cap that, I would say that, man, don't blow it. Post-apocalyptic stories are a dime a dozen. It's super easy to tell the stories where things go wrong. If you really want to flex your 1 in 100 million species storytelling gift from the heavens, tell the stories of how it went well. Create from that belief, and how does it go well? When we innovate, if we come from that place of in our work at Laetro, we do a lot of work. I've got 500 incredible creatives, and we do work for companies that's innovative and creative work. One of the things that we talk to our companies about is impossible minus one. My co-founder and CEO, Brett Williams, talks about this. Like, impossible is impossible, but impossible minus one, man, that could be possible. So what would need to be in place if you wanted to create something that was impossible minus one? That's a powerful place to stand when you tell stories. This needs to happen, this needs to happen, this needs to happen. And then from that structure, you can actually build out a story of things that you can do to be able to say 98% of the people use your services because. So story can be incredibly powerful, and especially for innovation, in ways that I don't think that companies have quite really used as powerfully as they could.
It's really fascinating, because the data goes, if we're looking for data to back up what you're talking about, we know that companies that actually take more shots on goal actually achieve more shots on goal, right? As opposed to, and we call that incremental innovation versus moonshot or disruptive innovation. Just the sheer act of jumping over the chasm, right? Or making the attempt to jump over the chasm will produce more favorable outcomes. if you can get yourself, I guess, back out of the chasm again. But,
Yeah, I
and
mean,
it's proof with like Michael Jordan, right? So number one guy who at the buzzer hit the 3-pointers, right? More game winning 3-pointers in the history of the NBA. Also,
and
more game winning loses at the buzzer than any other player in the history of the NBA, right? So, but you got to take the shots, right?
yeah, I mean, I think we're in this really interesting place right now where there's this conventional wisdom that says there's two different kind of mindsets. In a large corporation, you have to have a mindset of stability and process. The larger corporations are made up of processes that allow for consistency and stability. And then you have this other one that's like, let's break things and move fast. These small, one of my clients calls 5 guys and a dog that are innovating constantly. And that those
I call
two
them 2 Neds and a shed, by the way.
yeah, totally right. Right. Yeah. I don't know, 3, whatever, barges in a garage. I don't know.
We're going to come up with a female equivalent of that at some
Yeah,
point.
totally.
We are going to
Seriously.
get there, but I think it's the Hewlett Packard in their garage and Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs who were doing it in their garage. I think that's where that comes from.
Right.
Go ahead.
So this idea that things don't jibe with each other. You can't have a big corporation that also innovates at the level of innovation. And I wonder about that. And I think that it has to do with story. But it's not just the story of the product or service. It's the story of the storytellers. So here's an example. Like if I said, Susan, hey, I just made this movie. It's Dave's Lion King. You should come see it. You'd be like, yeah, maybe I might go see it. Be in an empty theater with my wife and daughter. Maybe if my daughter wasn't busy. But if I said Disney's Lion King, well, that's a different story. Why is that a different story? It's a different story because you know that the folks at Disney tell stories, right? Disney, I think, made a real turn in sort of like 2012, 13, 14, where they were like, hey, you know what? We're storytellers. So then they bought Lucas, they've got Marvel, and they have their properties for Disney. When it's the story of the storytellers, that's more than the product or service that people are offering. And in the story of the storytellers, like, who are you in the making of things? If you're Salesforce, for example, that says like their story was Ohana, that we're family. At Disney, we were all cast members. That was the story of the storytellers. I didn't have a lanyard with a barcode on it. I had a badge that said Dave on it, right? It's the same badge that the folks at the park wear. So I'm a cast member. I'm part of the crew. And every animated film is a picture and innovation. Like every animated film is a small business creating brand new ways of telling a story, whether it's through CG or different systems or ways of capturing the information, doing cleanup. I saw us go from traditional hand-drawn animation to CG in a period of 7 years. Every show was innovative. And so that's the story of the storytellers. We're inside of a large corporation. We're still allowed to check some edges, to push against our growth edges and see if there's a more efficient way of doing things. And so I wonder about that conventional wisdom that says you're either processing or you're either breaking things. I think it's possible to have a collective story. Now, you can't, maybe you need departments, but I do believe that being innovative is the story of the storytellers. It's not just a department, or it's not just a buying innovative company. If you buy an innovative company, you're going to have a mentality that still incorporates them.
How do we get people to think of themselves when they walk in to the office, or now as they open their laptop and sit at their desk with a button down on top and sweatpants on the bottom and do their awesome work?
Wait, can you see what I'm wearing? I can't.
How do we get employees to think about themselves as storytellers? What's the story you tell yourself first?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think it's education. Everybody's a storyteller, but there are levels of skills that are necessary. And so
That's why you and I have jobs, is that right?
yeah.
You
One
paint
of
with
the,
light and I with words,
I
right?
mean, When I was at Disney, there was creative development. There was a concerted effort to make sure that we were up to speed on how we told stories, how we managed our craft. And so it's not just about the doing of the thing, but it's the doing of the doer. Like I say, it's the making of the maker. And so, I was, when I got to Disney, I got this lecture that made the difference for me between being an amateur and being a pro. Before I left, I was the one giving those talks. And
Mm.
and so in a way, back to your analogy, like Phil Jackson was the coach of the Chicago Bulls and the Lakers and was a really amazing basketball player himself. I think he won 1 or 2 rings as a player, but he was also a student of the game. And I feel like for me, that's the same thing. Like I'm a painter, illustrator, and animator, but I'm also a student of creativity. And I believe that creativity is in all of us. How we let it out, well, the first place, it starts with belief. And so I talk to people and companies about, well, there's sort of 5 universal laws to creativity. There may be more. This is where we stand for the time being. One is, how do you believe? How do you believe in something and tell a story about it? 2 is, how do you iterate or phase up ideas from the thumbnail to the screen? 3 is, how do you collaborate powerfully? At Disney, we had a term called plussing. To be additive to each other was to be able to plus an idea, to serve that idea on its highest trajectory. The 4th is, how do we risk and engender trust in the process? Because risk, it is a universal law. If you're going to create and innovate, you're going to have to find that chasm to jump over. You got to leap. How do you get to a place where your whole team can leap with that same alacrity and enthusiasm? Well,
And
that's
safety. I mean, we jump together kind of thing.
yeah, yes, safety. Yeah, safety is a piece of it, but safety also maybe means data. Like if I'm going to jump and I've got all of my metrics ready, if I miss the jump, I can understand what was missing. And
Mm.
so those are pieces where we train for, how do you take risks in ways that engender trust. One of the practices, incremental risk. Another one is finding data. Another one is not being attached, being committed to solutions and not attached to the results necessarily, right? You look at the Elon Musk's company, SpaceX, right? Like STS-8 blows up on the launch pad and everybody's like, oh no, your thing blew up. And they're like, no, we got data. STS-9 goes up 100 yards, comes back down, falls over, blows up. Oh, that's so sad. Your thing blew up. No, we got data. Well, 10 made it up, succeeded, came back down, fell over, blew up. Oh, but 11, 12, now they've got data that allows for them to correct on those mistakes. And so is it a tragedy or is it an opportunity for data? And that's where risk can really engender trust more and more. And then the last of the 5 universal laws is that creative people complete, like they finish strong. And when you finish strong on something, that becomes the story that you tell that helps you believe even more in the thing that you're up to. It kind of completes the circuit. And so how do individuals, to answer your question in a long way, how do individuals participate in the innovative process? Well, you have to create an environment where they believe that they're a part of it. At Disney, we invited everybody to the screenings in the process, and everybody was allowed to make notes on it. You see that every time there's credits for a movie, you see the babies got credited, the accountants got credited, the people who work the parking lot get credit. Everybody's involved in the process of creativity. That's the story of the storytellers. That's a corporate story that allows for people to believe that they've got some agency. And that's where it starts. From there are deeper practices. How do you be a contribution that allows for you to plus something? Those are practices that they go on forever.
I think it's like such an interesting juxtaposition coming from Disney when you talk about plussing something, and in your new business, you're talking about impossible -1, right? These are very interesting sides of equations going on. I am in the middle of writing a blog post that was looking at what is this thing that stops us from becoming great innovators, great storytellers. And some of the statistics came out. So 85% of executives agreed that their greatest setbacks to innovation are fear of criticism, fear of uncertainty, and fear of personal negative career impact. And so
Mm.
setting up as managers, as directors of innovation spaces or creative spaces, that's our job, right? To ensure that we're creating a place of safety where experimentation and risk can exist so that people don't have to worry about that level of, or the way that we share criticism has to be handled in a particular way while we're still incubating great ideas.
Right. Well, gets missed in a data heavy world is
Mm.
the qualitative side of things. We're so quantitative about things, but in the animation industry, in the art world, you have to be qualitative about it. It has to have a feeling to it. And so one of the things that we know is that you have a box, you create inside this box or whatever the parameters are that are necessary. So the production costs, timing, resources, all of those necessary quantitative things. But it also has to have the qualitative piece to it. It has to have love and heart and resonance. And we know in the creative field that both of those are nuclear engines that power the creative output towards its solution. If you don't have the resources or the time or the other quantitative things, then you shortcut that solution. But what we forget is it's the same on this side. And so we know, like I know that if my heart is hurt, I'm not going to create as well. If somebody tells me in the process is not being additive to me in the process of creating, then I'm going to go south. If somebody tells a creative person that they suck in the process of what it is that they're creating, they're going to, it's not about the creative being too sensitive. It's that they're going to sabotage that piece of the creative engine that allows for the best creative work to happen. And so that's why plussing, to be additive, is a really powerful tool. At Disney, we used it daily. Like, it wasn't jargon. Can you plus this was a thing we heard all the time. When it
Wow.
gets broken is it's like, here's how you should plus this.
Ooh.
That's not working.
Wow. I mean, really hear how that sounds, right? As soon as someone starts shooting on you, you're like, ugh, get this
Right.
shit off me, right? I mean, it's the
Right.
worst.
Yeah.
It's the absolute worst. Yeah.
Right. Right. So there are practices inside of that. Like for plussing, there are practices. Like one of the things that everybody knows, but it's hard to practice, is yes and. Like you look
Right.
at different industries to see how did they manage their ability to collaborate. And the entertainment industry collaboration is incredible. Like it's at the highest level. And so when you look at that industry and you look at how do they collaborate, where they take an idea and it becomes a multi-$100 million film that generates revenue and influences people all over the world, that's a powerful piece of creativity that might be directed by a director, but the level of collaboration is magnificent inside of it. And it comes from yes and. Yes is an acknowledgement, and is an addition. It's an additive thing that is in support of the trajectory of an idea, not the ego that brought it. So there are
Can you say that
practices.
one more time, just so my listeners really hear it?
Right. So to plus something is to be in service to the trajectory of the idea, not the ego that brought it.
Yes.
That we're in service to the highest level of the, like we think about ideas as creatures, right? Like this idea, it has a life to it. We want to breathe into it and animate it. We were animators. Our job was to bring to life this idea to its highest expression. Now, I don't mean to say that there aren't bad ideas. There is such a thing as a bad idea. People go into brainstorms and they go, well, there's no such thing as a bad idea. And then Chuck over there comes up with something that you're just like, oh my God, this again, right? But why is it a bad idea? It's maybe not necessarily a bad idea, but it is not an idea that serves the highest trajectory of this thing that we're creating. And when I have a conversation in that space, then it's not about, hey, Chuck, your ideas suck. It's like, hey, Chuck, let's talk about, does this idea serve the highest trajectory of this thing? And if you can explain to me where it does, all right, cool, I'm open. But then at that point, maybe both of us can see, oh yeah, but that idea might be better over here in chapter 3 on this thing. right? And so when we neutralize our attachment to these things, like another practice for plussing is anonymizing ideas. You have an idea and we don't go, all right, let's put up Susan's idea. We say, all right, Susan has this great idea. Let's go idea one. Now everybody pile on idea one and let's see if we can get idea one to a thing. And then at some point, Tracy says, hey, wait a second, what about this one? And we go, all right, cool. Tracy's got this one, idea two. Let's pile on idea two. And so that way we're in service to the trajectory of these ideas by being additive to them and not diminishing of the people who brought it. And in that way, we can keep that engine of love and connection and resonance, that qualitative side, empowered throughout the creative process. And I think what happens with that is you actually get emotional maturity out of it. I think that that's when we're really playing a big game, and you can do what one of my friends who's a A-list director says is a good lift. And a good lift is where you can take a piece out of the story that you love and still love the story.
Mm. You know, it's funny. I watched my first animated film in probably 10 years on a flight back from Vienna last month. It was Encanto.
Oh yeah, beautiful.
And now I know why we don't talk about Bruno. I'm really excited to finally have the answer to that question that was all over my friends' lives with kids.
Right.
But I mean, I think about the difference between watching Snow White when I was a little girl to watching Encanto today. On every conceivable level, that movie plus what any little girl could have conceived of, right? It's just amazing. And I think about, I mean, Disney's a powerful corporation with very significant, I would imagine, revenue and profit goals for the work that it does. But the fact that it thinks of itself first and foremost as a storytelling engine rather than a movie maker is a very different mindset. But I fear that a lot of my friends in the corporate world whose businesses don't see themselves that way, and those three fears that we talked about, which are intrinsic to being human, really, forget about just even animating, right? We fear
Totally.
criticism, we fear failure. And I think about, I became super enamored with Elizabeth Gilbert's book on creativity. I don't know
Mhm.
if you read Big Magic.
Yeah, it's
Um,
amazing.
but it's one that comes back to me, and she said something, and I'm just going to read this quote because it resonates to this conversation. She said, recognizing that people's reactions don't belong to you is the only sane way to create. If
Mm.
people enjoy what you've created, terrific. If people ignore what you've created, too bad. If people misunderstand what you've created, don't sweat it. And what if people absolutely hate what you've created? What if people attack you with savage vitriol and insult your intelligence and malign your motives and drag your good name through the mud? Just smile sweetly and suggest, as politely as you possibly can, that they go make their own fucking art, then stubbornly continue making yours. And
That's great. I love that.
so, can we get to a point where the innovation team, right? And recognizing that it needs to, as you say, amplify collaboration. So there's more skin in the game, right? So that we have more opportunities. The way to avoid risk is to involve more voices potentially, right? That we get a diversity of ideas, that we see things differently potentially, and that we can politely say to people, F off.
Right. Well, let me offer this, that
Okay.
there is no way to avoid risk. It's going to happen. It's how life works. And wow, it's where the juice is. It's where the joy is. Like there's a
Like falling in love, to your point earlier.
yeah, like I load a brush up with a couple of different colors and phew, I make a stroke. Like that is a risk at that level. Like that risk is in the micro, but everything is everything, right? So in that space, how do I feel? Can I use this apt magic wand that is it's a wooden stick with a horsehair brush on it that has pigments that are pulled from the earth to be an apt transmitter of my consciousness in a stroke a the more that I resonate inside of me with that mark, the more it likely will resonate with you. But in
Mm.
order for me to do that, I've got to expose myself. I've got to connect deeply with that thing that is me. Risk is a universal law of creativity. It's going to happen. Now, are there ways that we can kind of set ourselves up to be able to appreciate the data that comes from that risk, to be able to appreciate the learnings that come from it? I have a sketchbook, and people look at my sketchbooks and they go, oh my God, every page is amazing. There's 50 beautiful pages in this sketchbook. And what they don't know is the sketchbook came with 100 pages. Like,
Mm.
I tear out the things that aren't my friends. That's data. Okay, cool. I'm not going to do that one again. And so risk is not something that we can avoid, but we can learn to love it in ways that offer an opportunity for us to trust each other, to check our data, to push our growth edge. And man, that's life.
You know what? I think I'm going to leave it there because I think that's what we have to take into account as we find new ways to innovate. And thank you so much for inspiring us today, Dave. I ask 3 questions of all my guests who come on the show. So let me ask you this. What do you
Yeah.
believe is the greatest innovation of all time?
Flight.
Flight. Fantastic. Okay. And if you could join any innovation team in the history of our humanity, what team would you have liked to have been on?
Oh, I love the stuff that they're doing at JPL. Like if I wasn't doing the thing that I'm doing, because the team that I'm on right now is amazing. Like we're innovating a process that allows for us to get great work for creatives and do great work for companies. So
Mm.
that's pretty fun right now. We're building some really new tools for it. If I wasn't with Laetro, it would be probably Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
Oh,
They're-
listeners, you might want to go back to our episode with Chris Mattman, who is the head of innovation at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
Nice.
By the way, when I asked him, how does NASA envision the next 50 years of space travel, of even jet propulsion technologies? How do you even conceive of it? He said, you're not going to believe this, but we invite Hollywood scriptwriters, futurists, and our NASA scientists to walk into a white room filled with whiteboards, and we create a fiction of what the next 50 years are, and we work backwards to create that.
Right. Right. It's a story. That's exactly what we were saying, is that believing is seeing.
Yeah. So you're halfway there. I asked Chris, and Chris, if you're listening again, Dave and I would like to join you in the storytelling
Oh,
session
heck yeah.
one more
I'd
time.
love.
I make this pitch. I feel like Jimmy Kimmel telling Matt Damon he got bumped from the show. But and my last question for you is, what really annoys you or irritates you, or something you just simply wish would be in the world, either that thing that should be fixed or that thing that you would love to see that does not yet exist?
Yeah. I think that I wish that people would recognize the unbelievable, astronomical good fortune that each of us has for being alive on Earth right now. Like the odds of your birth, the odds of you being here on this planet right now are so astronomically low. Like the privilege that we have to be on this planet right now, that life is so incredibly precious. 90 million species have gone extinct. We have the telescopes that look 14 billion years out, and really we don't see anybody else out there like us. Like this small floating blue-green jewel is so precious that I
And we
wish.
get to be humans on it, right? We're not
Right,
even a mosquito.
right. Like our privilege is so great that if we could wrap our minds around it for only a moment, we would recognize that all there is love, and that all of the other stuff is just a waste of our time.
Hmm. I heard someone say the other day, if I could give you $5 million today, would you take it? Would you take $5 million? Do you know exactly what you do with it? You know what? Let's change that. Let's make it $100 million. I would give it to you today. Can you imagine it? Would you like that? Okay. What if I gave it to you today, but I didn't give you tomorrow? Would you still want it?
Right,
And you're like, that's the question we need to ask ourselves every morning, right?
right.
Today is $100 million day. Go
Yeah,
get it.
yeah. Yeah, you are a 1 in 100 million species capable of telling stories that make a difference for the world. Tell them.
Yes. Yes. Dave Zaboski, thank you so much for joining me on the show. If people want to get
Susan,
in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
they can find me on LinkedIn at Dave Zaboski. They can find me Dave at Laetro.com, Laetro.com. And yeah, normal social media channels.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Dave,
thank you
thanks
so
so
much.
much.
Yes, thank you so much. This is beautiful.
Take care.
All right.